when you get a policeman pull up behind you. Secondly, white privilege. I understand the concept. It's interesting, though, isn't it, that the suicide rate for whites is 2.5 times that for blacks and Hispanics. Go figure what that means. The reason I called was from a standpoint of types of things that we definitely need police reform in. I don't think it's about the policemen so much. It's certainly in training, but the training is about the laws and where our leaders are coming from, where they think the training needs to happen. For example, what Glasgow was talking about, and to some degree, like take the 1994 crime bill. It probably resulted in millions more black men getting records. My son, one of my sons, got stopped for speeding. He said it was okay for the policeman to check his truck. He found a marijuana pipe, and under the passenger seat, he found a friend's knife had been left there. The kid's mother wrote an affidavit to the district attorney saying it wasn't my son. Didn't matter. He got charged with drugs and weapons, and I had to spend thousands of dollars. First offense had to spend thousands of dollars to make it where he wouldn't have a record. Ultimately, that's so much a part of the problem. The police, they have all these petty things to get charged for, and if you don't have parents that can help you get past what might be this blot on your record, you won't be able to get a job. And it really is bad. Malcolm Gladwell was on C-SPAN a few weeks ago, and he was being interviewed. In fact, I'm not sure, it wasn't you. He was being interviewed about his newest book, Talking to Strangers, how to talk to strangers. Yeah. I had it on a book thing. I wasn't that interested in it, but after I heard the interview, I had to listen to it. Every policeman, everybody that has anything to do with policing needs to listen to that from start to finish. It starts out with the Sandra Bland incident, and it goes through so many interesting things about how we're not understanding. We think we understand people's interpretation of people's body language, and boy, do we not. And policemen are trained to interpret things a certain way, and boy, do they have it wrong. And Gladwell does such great research and work. The first thing I read of his long ago was the tipping points, where he went into great detail about how Giuliani and the broken windows theory applied and how they were able to do what they did in New York. But back to the talking to strangers, part of its premise is that the police are being used, for example, to raise money. With Ferguson, one of the things after Ferguson was they found the police were making all these stops because the city managers wanted them to raise a certain amount of money. They had ticket quotas. That's probably pretty much everywhere. And I remember that after that study came out, everybody went, "Oh my God, they're terrible." They were middle of the road. They were by no means at the high end of that spectrum. And you get this ticket mill thing where policemen are being used improperly to raise money. I would rather pay an extra $200 to $500 a year in property taxes and let the police deal with what they really ought to be dealing with: serious crime and serious issues, and not trying to give people ticky-tacky things and then stop them. And then because it's part of their training, you stop them for a taillight, or like Sandra Bland, she was stopped for failure to signal a lane change, which was caused by the policeman rushing up behind her. She changed lanes real quick to get out of his way, and that's what he stopped her for. And one thing led to another, and 3 days later, she committed suicide in a cell.
Okay, so David, I'm going to move on so I can get some more other voices in, but for those that are interested in that interview with Malcolm Gladwell, you can find it on our website, cspan.org. Darwin in Charlotte, North Carolina. Darwin, you're a police officer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and how long have you been a police officer? What changes would you want to see?
I was a police officer in New York, a Navy veteran. Now I'm not a police officer, but I know a lot about being police. The question I got is, how do you guys select the guests? Because the guy I was on earlier got charged in New York. He's a felon, and he's here advising us on our life. This is a bad example. He's one of the reasons I left the police department, because he was a police chairman, had to stop and frisk, doing all these different stuff, and he's taking bribes. He was taking money under the table. He was collecting bribes. So you guys need to have a better vetting system to get folks here to advise us. Do you want your kids to get advice from a felon, a convicted felon?
Darwin, you must have missed the part of the conversation where he said that whole experience has shaped his view of criminal justice reform and changes that need to be made. And he's now with the group Right on Crime. Listen to the whole conversation. And we have people from all different perspectives on the show, so that you can listen to their side of it, and you can call up and disagree or agree with what they have to say, and have a civil exchange with them. Sean in Columbus, Ohio, we'll go to you next. Good morning to you.
Good morning. I just wanted to I think we're kind of missing the point. The point really isn't race. Race is a factor, but the point is power. The cops have so much power to make a decision, to be upset, pull the trigger, and then now we have body cams to where we can make the judgment. But the problem is their training is more military than police. That when he shoots him in the back, it's dead center mass. That's a military. I'm a veteran. These tactics are what you use in Baghdad against terrorists, not against our own civilians. And it's hard to reel back that power, because then you talk about defunding. But then again, if we quit sending people to prison, are we defunding the prisons? If we lessen sentencing, and I mean, there are many factors that fall into this. Race is one, but more white people get killed by cops than any race. I'm outraged at that. I'm outraged at the brutality that just seems to go on. And the only thing conservatives say is, well, there's bad apples. We just need to train more. They don't plan the training. They just make the excuse of the next killing. It's the same rhetoric. Doesn't matter. All they do is point at the victim and say, look, this guy is a criminal, a thug. Well, that's just blatant. If it's not racism, it's classism at the minor. You're still judging somebody by looking at them, because they don't know until later what their record is, just what they pull up on the screen.
Sean in Columbus, Ohio. Now, this is what House Democrats, along with Senate Democrats, have proposed, but the House is ruled right now by Democrats. They're in the majority. They put forth the Justice and Policing Act of 2020, and they want to reform qualified immunity, amend the federal criminal statutes to prosecute police misconduct, create a nationwide police misconduct registry, and mandate reporting of police use of force. They also want to prohibit racial and religious profiling, ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants, limit the transfer of military-grade equipment to state and local law enforcement, mandate the use of police body cameras, and make lynching a federal crime. On the Senate side, where Republicans are in the majority, Senator Tim Scott has put forth a draft of his legislation. It's expected to get a Senate vote on the floor next week, and June 25th, I think, is the date for the House vote. But in the Senate, this is what they're proposing. Restricts chokehold use by reducing federal funds to state and local departments that haven't banned the tactic, increases funding for police body cameras, requires the reporting of uses of force that causes death or serious injury, and requires states to provide data on no-knock search warrants, adds a new crime of conspiracy to commit a hate crime to the criminal code. Allison in Katy, Texas. Allison, good morning to you. What police reforms would you support?
Well, I would support any reform at this point. I just wanted to call and quote a statistic from Statista.com about the number of police officers, non-federal police officers arrested for murder who have been convicted between 2005 and 2020. And it says, of the 42 police officers convicted following their arrest for murder due to an on-duty shooting, only 5 ended up being convicted of murder. The most common offense these officers were convicted of was the lesser charge of manslaughter with 11 convictions. This is all of the U.S. It's for the last 15 years. And that is something really to think about for qualified immunity. And that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll go Stripling in Everett, Washington. Good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm well. What do you want to see in police reform?
Okay. In Mount Vernon, Washington, a friend of mine happened to pick up was white, and he picked up a colored girl, and he was driving through Mount Vernon, Washington, and his blinker was out. He gets pulled over, and they hauled him in. No warrants, no nothing, took him to the jail, and was calling him all sorts of names because he picked up a black girl. He ended up, this is no joke, he ended up getting hung in the Mount Vernon jail. His wife, he died, and the autopsy showed that the police officer, he had handprints on top of his head when he was hung, and his wife ended up getting $18 million, and his kids have to grow up with no dad and stuff like that. The police officers, 2 of them, barely got a slap on the hand. Here's another issue. My son in Marysville at the Tualatin Indian Reservation in front of the casino, him and his nephew was smoking pot and another person in a car. The guards came out, called the sheriffs, they came there, and the state patrol, and it was his nephew's black. Out of all 3 of them, 2 of them white, 1 of them black. No warrants on any of them. And the black kid did not have a marijuana pipe on him. They ended up arresting the black person and letting the 2 white people go with no trouble at all. This is out of control. I mean, we need to do something. People need to wake up. How would Trump like it if he woke up tomorrow and he was black? That's what I wish would happen. He needs to stop and think. We all do. God created us equal, all of us. We need to start loving each other and watching out for each other. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, we'll go to Baltimore, Maryland. Robert, are you a police officer?
I'm a former police officer. I used to be a police officer downtown in Baltimore City at the Harbor City
Okay.
Galleria, where we had arrest powers and so forth. So anyway, I like to pretty much just chime in as far as my 2 cents are concerned.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, people always talk about we need more training. We need more training. We need more training. Well, I'm going to pretty much put out this very basic common sense statement. I'm going to say this, that it's funny how, for example, whenever a white police officer generally, and I work with several, whenever a white police officer feels that he's in danger, whether or not that dangerous amount is manufactured or actually legitimate, his first thought is going to be, and I get it, we're all human, self-defense, but his first thought goes right to lethal force. To put into perspective, black police officers and white police officers and Asian and everybody else, we all receive the same training. However, when we talk about the incidents of all these killings and so forth, you know, it boggles the mind how people never consider that. Why do we not ever see, for example, black police officers shooting white people? And don't get me wrong, because I used to patrol an area that was a lower economic, mainly white area, an area called Dundalk. For those who know what I'm talking about, they know what kind of area that is. And for the most part, we never ever hear about some black police officer killing some white culprit because he was in danger of life. As a matter of fact, there was one incident that took place roughly 3.5 years ago where a black police officer literally disarmed a white man on the side of the road who actually had a shotgun pointed towards him. He took the gun from this man, arrested him. Now, if that were reversed, that man who had brandished the gun would easily have been killed. I used to work down in Harbor, like I said before, Baltimore City, and I would get calls all the time for disturbances near the mall and so forth. And down by the inner harbor, there's an area called it's like a little manufactured pool. So it's not a swimming pool, but it's more like a little decorative pool. At any rate, near that area is area called Pigstown. Pigstown is a very low income mixed white and black area. Whenever we would get a call, it would always be for the little black boys who came from Pigstown to swim in that little pool right in front of the shopping area. Whereas when it was mostly white boys with a few black boys sprinkled in, it would be fine because they're just boys being boys. So there's always a double standard. So again, I'm gonna go back to my original point. Black police officers and white police officers receive the same training, yet you never hear an instance where some black police officer has killed some white person because they were, quote unquote, in fear of their lives, even when they have guns literally trained at them. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Robert, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Why aren't you a police officer anymore? Or are you?
So I got out. So I was in the Marine Corps, came out, and I joined, like I said, the Harbor City Police Department. And then I couldn't take the double standards. And to be honest, there was also internal racism. Speaking of internal racism, with Baltimore, with BDP, they have something called a Vanguard. The Vanguard is actually an internal union for the Black police officers within Baltimore City Police Department, because the racism was such at a high level that the Black police officers needed to band together to pretty much confront the racism within only police departments. So what does that tell you about how the white police officers would deal with a regular Black civilian? So it's endemic as far as police departments. So I got out of law enforcement, and I've been now a teacher for the last 23 years, and I love it.
Thanks for calling in today. Oh, go ahead, Robert. What?
I want to say one other thing. So now that I've been in education for the last 23 years, what I've now seen is that when it comes to officer trials now, little Black boys who are just being boys generally are always overwhelmingly referred to the administration or the office by white female teachers. Whereas though that same boy in my class generally comes, and you might talk, well, you're a man and she's a woman, but there are also many other reverse situations where so there could be a Black female teacher and she's not going to send a kid to the office because he can't sit still, because no child can sit still. When I attend meetings, staff meetings with other teachers, and the principal is addressing the staff, and the first thing he says is, okay, guys, need your attention. Invariably, there'll always be people in the back still talking, still carrying their conversation. Yet those same people who carry their conversations incessantly during the staff meetings are the same ones who are quick to refer a boy to the office for doing the same exact thing. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
All right, Robert there in Baltimore. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Reverend Liz Theo-Harris, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, about their efforts to combat economic and racial injustice. That conversation coming up.
American History TV on C-SPAN 3, exploring the people and events that tell the American story every weekend. Coming up Sunday, beginning at 9 a.m. Eastern, we're marking the 70th anniversary of the Korean War, live on Washington Journal and American History TV, with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Charles Hanley, author of Ghost Flames, Life and Death in a Hidden War, Korea, 1950 to 53. And Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, Real America features a series of U.S. government Korean War films, starting with To Help Peace Survive, a 1974 Defense Department orientation film for soldiers assigned to South Korea. And at 7 p.m. on Oral Histories, U.S. Marine veteran Alan Clark on serving 2 tours in Korea between 1950 and 1953. Exploring the American story. Watch American History TV this weekend on C-SPAN 3.
Washington Journal continues. Joining us now is Reverend Liz Theo-Harris, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. Reverend, what is this campaign?
The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, was formed about 3 years ago. We're organized in 46 states across the country, led by poor and impacted people, people of faith, people of conscience, and activists and advocates who see the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, militarism in the war economy, and this distorted moral narrative eating away at our society, saying we can do better, we can do more, and so let's build a movement from the bottom up.
What are the roots of this racial and economic injustice? Oh, I think we lost her there with technical problems. We'll try to get Reverend Liz Theo-Harris back. By the way, she's part of, as we said, the co-chair of this group, and they are having a virtual march tomorrow, a virtual rally to protest racism and poverty. That's tomorrow, Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern time, and we're going to have coverage of that on C-SPAN, as well as our website, cspan.org, or you can listen along to that on the free C-SPAN radio app. We're going to talk about racial and economic injustice with her. Let me give you the phone lines, and you can start dialing in so that when we get the Reverend back, we can just go right to calls. The phone number is Eastern Central part of the country, 202-748-8000. Mountain Pacific area, 202-748-8001. Also, members of the clergy this morning, we have a line for you. We'd like to hear from you as part of this conversation. And your line is 202-748-8002. Reverend Liz Theohara is coming up here any minute. While we wait for her to come on, let's just talk about a conversation that we're going to have later on in the program with African Americans only, and talk about this day in history, Juneteenth, June 19th, 2020. And I'll just tee it up for later by pointing out that Usher has this piece in the Washington Post. It's past time to make Juneteenth a national holiday. He says, I have no issue with celebrating America's independence on July 4th. For me, wearing the shirt was an opportunity to inform others who may not necessarily know the history of Black people in America and who are not aware that Juneteenth is our authentic day of self-determination. It is ours to honor the legacy of our ancestors, ours to celebrate, and ours to remember where we once were as a people. And it should be a national holiday, observed by all Americans, he writes. And he goes on to say that I am humbled by the platform that has been given to me because of my musical talents. But I know I must do more with it. As an artist, it is my duty to reflect the trying times in which we live. My heart is shattered by the ongoing injustice in this country, incited by its long history of racism that has led to deadly outcomes for too many of our people. This country must change, and it must change quickly. Recognizing Juneteenth as a national holiday would be a small gesture compared with the greater social needs of Black people in America. But it can remind us of our journey toward freedom and the work America still has to do. We could observe it, as many Black Americans already do, by celebrating both our first step toward freedom as Black people in America and also the many contributions to this land, the construction of Black Wall Street, the invention of jazz, rock and roll, hip hop, and R&B, and all the entrepreneurship and business brilliance, extraordinary cuisine, sports excellence, political power, and global cultural influence Black Americans have given the world. And rather than observing Juneteenth as we do other holidays by taking it off, we can make it a day when Black culture, Black entrepreneurship, and Black businesses get our support. A national Juneteenth observance can affirm that Black lives matter. I proudly join the incredible people and organizations who have been working on this for years, among them the inspiring Opal Lee, a 93-year-old from Fort Worth, who has campaigned for the recognition of Juneteenth at the state and local levels. As we celebrate today, let's stay open to possibility. Let's support Black-owned businesses today and every day. Let's uplift our resilient history. Let's honor our people. Happy Juneteenth, America. So that's Usher writing in the Washington Post, and we'll get to that conversation with African Americans only in our last 30 minutes of today's Washington Journal. Related to that, though, is Liz Theohara, the Reverend of the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. Thank you for joining us. Glad to have you back with us. We'll try this again.
Thank you so much.
I asked you before we lost you there, was what is the roots of this racial and economic injustice?
So we live in a nation that has 140 million people who are poor and low income. 61% of African Americans, 65% of Latinos, 33% of white Americans, but who make up 67 million poor and low income people. We are living in a time when we have the capacity to actually address these issues, but right now we lack the political will. The nation was founded on racial injustice, the original sins of the indigenous genocide, the 400 years of U.S. chattel slavery. And we still need to overcome these injustices and these inequities. And we can if we come together as a people across all the lines that divide us and build a movement from the bottom up, a movement that stands against racism and poverty and see the interconnection between those issues and the crisis of our environment, the militarization of our communities, and the fact that our nation spends more than half of its money on military contractors and militarizing the country and the world when we spend very little on education and healthcare and living wage jobs for anyone, especially people of color.
So what changes are you calling for?
We are putting forth a moral agenda, an agenda that stands for universal single-payer health care, that stands for living wages and a guaranteed adequate income, that talks about the public education being free and quality, and even free college education, the ending of the resegregation of schools. We're talking about an end to mass incarceration and funneling money out of the military, out of police forces, and into programs of social uplift. We have a broad and bold program. We will be further announcing a policy platform that the Poor People's Campaign has when people join us for a mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington that will be online tomorrow, June 20th at 10 a.m. Central Time, Eastern Time. And so it's many different demands that are coming up from grassroots communities, from poor and impacted leaders of all races and nationalities, all religions, all genders, all sexualities, who are saying that we've been hurting for far too long and we won't be silent anymore. And so we're going to build power, we're going to shift this narrative, and we're going to build a movement that puts people's lives over corporate profits.
We'll go to calls. Winston in Lambertville, New Jersey. Good morning. Welcome to the conversation.
Hi. Thanks for giving me a chance to speak. I have been paying attention to some of the root causes of economic inequality. And what I've observed is that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is basically failing at its mission. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, 42 U.S.C. 2000E 8E, is a clause in the statute that requires that commission to collect component 1 and component 2 employment data. Component 1 is essentially demographic information, so who, what number of ethnic groups are employed at a large corporation, 100 employees or more. And component 2 essentially collects information about salary bands. So, across the salary spectrum, which groups are earning what salary. Years ago, closer to when the act was, came into effect, that surveillance of component 1 and component 2 data was coupled with proactive enforcement so that the data that was recorded might trigger an investigation from the commission to find out why diversity didn't represent the folks who were eligible for employment in the area. Over time, reverse racism essentially decoupled enforcement from surveillance, and the agency was relegated to just a data collection agency. And of course, they have some administrative and some enforcement to follow up on complaints, but it doesn't seem like they're proactively going after obvious cases of large corporations showing a lack of diversity. For example, Google.
Okay, Winston, I'm going to leave it there. Reverend Theo Harris, your thoughts?
So I really deeply appreciate the raising of the issue of economic and racial inequality in the workplace. We have 62 million people in this country who are working at jobs that make less than a living wage. And we have very high levels of unemployment right now because of the pandemic. And what existed before was that it was hard for different people to get into some of the jobs that did exist. And so I deeply appreciate both this point around diversity in our workplace, as well as the fact that what we're seeing in 27 states since 2010 have enacted racist voter suppression laws. And so some of the state and local infrastructure to make sure that we're not using race-based gerrymandering and suppressing of our democracy, so as to be able to then, when a community or when are trying to hold corporations accountable, that isn't done as much. And so I think that indeed we have a real issue of systemic racism, systemic economic injustice that isn't just an accident. It's right in the middle of our system and the core of the problems that people are facing.
Kevin's next in Trenton, New Jersey. Hi, Kevin.
Oh, hey, hello.
Morning. Go ahead.
Hey, okay, yeah, I'm just saying, I've read a great book. All that you need to know is in kindergarten. This is where it changes, where everybody treated everybody equal early on. Then they get their preconceived notions over there. They're scared. They want to be racist and everything. It's just a matter of treat everybody equal. Don't come with the preconceived notions. Oh, I'm scared, or he doesn't look like me. That's how it is. That's all I got to say. I love C-SPAN. I watch it every day. And Reverend Liz, you're gorgeous, girl. Give me a smile.
Go ahead, Reverend.
So, I mean, I think when we need to talk about systemic racism, and I appreciate this point that we are not naturally, when we're born, necessarily a racist people, but that what happens because of media, because of education systems, and because of larger structural inequities, is that racism is at the core of our society. And so what we need then to solve a structural problem like systemic racism are structural issues and solutions, including policy. So if we're serious about trying to end racism, which is attainable, we need living wages. If we're serious about, ending systemic racism, then we need to be fighting back against the resegregation of our schools. If we're serious about the health inequities experienced by African Americans, Latinos, people of color, then we need to make sure that we have access to healthcare for absolutely everybody. And so again, this issue of racism doesn't have to be the way it is, but until we have structural policy solutions to it, then people are taught that fear. People are taught to not work together. But what we're seeing across the country in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, is that people across all of these lines, especially this line of race that has been used to divide and conquer people for so many years now, is that people are coming together across those lines and fighting for economic and racial justice together, hand in hand, young and old, across all of our diversity.
David in Denver, North Carolina. Go ahead, David.
Hi. First of all, if you want to look at people that are trying to divide people by race, it's the Democrat Party. Second of all, I don't think there's, if you want to look at systemic racism, let's go back to the 50s when black people had to drink out of a different water fountain. They couldn't go to the same bathroom. They couldn't eat at the same lunch counter. We've moved a long way from that. We've actually moved to the point where if you don't kneel before someone with Black Lives Matter, you're considered a racist. If you don't tweet something in support of Black Lives Matter, you're a racist. And my question is for this lady that looks whiter than me, what do you want? And I'll answer the question for you, but what do you want? Other than the same bromides you've been pointing out of, we want, we want programs, we want education, we want this, we want that. What you want is, you want reparations. Say it. Is that what you want?
The Poor People's Campaign, A National Call for Moral Revival, has a whole platform, and many of the policies I'm speaking to are what we put forth in that platform. And there are things like living wages for everybody. There are things like universal health care for everybody. And we are not a partisan movement. We challenge Democrats, Republican, Independents. We're deeply political in that we believe that the issues of liberty and justice and domestic tranquility are political issues, but that we need to fight them across partisan lines and across racial lines. And what I want is for all people in this country and across the world to have what they need to thrive, not just barely survive. And with the level of productivity and resources that this nation, the richest nation in the world, has, nobody should be homeless. Nobody should be without health care. And everybody should be able to make a wage that they can live and raise their kids with. And we should all work to attain that.
Becky is in Bumpus, Virginia.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi. I kind of wanted to tie together a few things that we've been talking about this morning. I grew up very poor, and I mean beyond poor. Didn't have one parent, and he was hardly ever there. And that stuck with me my entire life. But as I was going through school, I decided to become a teacher to help children like me. But little did I know, I put myself back in that category because that is a low paying wage. If you put in all the hours you have to put in as a teacher. So I think education, and teachers need to be paid more. I mean, doctors get paid, nurses get paid, teachers are very critical, I think. But I also found that in my career of teaching that I was segregated against, and I'm white. But I was segregated against because I was poor white, because I looked after those kids. And that's very difficult to live with when you think you're doing the best thing for everybody. And then I wanted to tie one more thing to Mr. Brooks. In the last interview that he brought out, after the shooting and all, his words meant a lot, I think, if people will listen to that. He was asking for help, been in prison, knew what it was like, didn't want to go back, but needed a mentor, someone to help guide him when he got out, just like teachers help children. Because I can't imagine being in prison, but I was wrongfully arrested one time, and it was the scariest experience of my life. I didn't have to go to jail or prison, but just the fact of having to go through it, it was just totally humiliating.
Reverend, a lot there for you. Go ahead.
Indeed. So I want to thank also the caller for your service as a teacher. Education is so important if we're really going to take on the systemic injustices that are in our society. And I also want to encourage folks to connect with the Poor People's Campaign and to tune in to our mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington tomorrow at 10 a.m. Because many of the stories of those that are most impacted by these injustices, teachers, folks that have grown up in homes that have no sanitation treatment, folks whose water has been being cut off, families that are living in homeless encampments, are going to get a chance to tell their stories and also the solutions to those injustices and how people are rising up together to say that this doesn't have to be this way. That when one military contractor gets as much money from the federal government as it would take to expand healthcare in 14 states, that it doesn't have to be that people suffer the way that people are suffering today. And so, I appreciate educators, and I think education is so key. What we know is that every dollar invested in early childhood education saves this nation $7 in other kind of programs that are needed if we don't actually invest in education, invest in children, and actually end child poverty and all poverty throughout the country.
Let's go to, and by the way, the rally, 10 a.m. Eastern time, you can tune in and watch it right here on C-SPAN, on our website, cspan.org, or with the free C-SPAN radio app. Bill, Erie, Pennsylvania. Bill, can you make it quick? Oh, I have to push the button for that to happen. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what the Reverend thinks about alternate schools, because our schools are failing, especially in the inner cities. Shouldn't those kids have an alternative school to go to, like either parochial school, Christian school, or I just wanted to know what Liz thought about that.
So thanks for this question about education. We in the Poor People's Campaign are putting forth that we need to fund our public schools to the extent that they can be a beautiful place for kids to be educated, that we need to push back against the resegregation of schools, and we can do so with resources. In fact, it's an investment in our future when we lift up education and public and available to everybody. And so, what we're seeing in this pandemic right now is that so many kids are having to be, educated online and in a distance way. And that's hard on families, that's hard on communities. And instead we need to invest more resources to make our schools great, because they can be. And kids need education, and our society will benefit when we invest in education and in children.
If our viewers are interested, you can learn more if you go to poorpeoplescampaign.org. Reverend Theo Harris, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
More of your calls after this break. We want to hear from members of the African American community about what this day, June 19th, Juneteenth, means to you. Here's a short history of Juneteenth from our colleagues at American History and Book TV when they visited Galveston, Texas, a few years back, where Juneteenth was born.
Emancipation Proclamation, it was signed into law in September of 1862 to go in effect January 1, 1863. But the enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation did not go into effect here in the South until 2.5 years after the effective date. African American slaves couldn't read. It was against the law for them to be able to read, so I don't think they knew about it. The Union troops arrived in Galveston on June the 18th, 1865. There was 2,000 Union soldiers along with General Gordon Granger. Some of the slaves, once they heard that they were free, were jubilant. Others were depressed because they had never been on their own. They didn't have a place to go. They didn't have any money to purchase anything. So a lot of the slaves stayed at First Baptist Church, which was established in 1840. Well, we're at the Ashton Villa, which was the first brick mansion constructed on Galveston Island. It was constructed in 1859. This place also served as the residence for the Confederate Army, and then later General Gordon Granger's residence when he arrived on June 18, 1865. We've been having a celebration here at Ashton Villa for 36 years, and it coincided with the state of Texas holiday for Juneteenth. The Texas state holiday occurred by an African-American representative by the name of Al Edwards of Houston, Texas. He remembered as a kid growing up the celebration of Juneteenth, so he introduced a law that making that a paid holiday. There were only 8 African-American legislators, black legislators, in the legislature, and this bill passed, and it was signed into law, and it went into effect June 13, 1979. It was mainly here in the South where the celebration was, you had major celebration. Today, you have big celebrations in Milwaukee, you have Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., New York, San Antonio. There are a lot of over 40 states, and we've been told that there are at least 5 foreign countries that even celebrate the Juneteenth Emancipation Day. This date is very important because it showed that even though Texas is a southern state, it had compassion for the African Americans' struggle of slavery.
From our friends at American History TV and Book TV, a little history on Juneteenth, this day, June 19th, 2020. African Americans only this morning. What does this day mean to you? Do you celebrate it? Do you think there should be a national holiday? Leon in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Leon, go ahead.
Yes, I do think it should be a national holiday with meaning. What I'm saying is, if we're going to have a national holiday recognized by everyone, then everyone should know the meaning of Juneteenth, and everybody should work toward trying to do the things that Juneteenth represents, that is teaching everybody, not just African Americans, what this whole situation is about.
And Leon, I don't know if you saw a little bit earlier at the top of the hour, we read Usher's piece in the Washington Post. He says it's past time to make it a national holiday, but recognize the contributions of African Americans to this country when you make it a national holiday. And he says, rather than observing this as we do with other holidays by taking it off, we can make it a day when Black culture, Black entrepreneurship, and Black businesses get our support. What do you think about that?
That's a fairly good idea. But if I may add to it, I don't want Juneteenth to be like February as Black History Month. That's almost meaningless. I won't have to try to explain it, but it doesn't have that much meaning. I want Juneteenth to represent a lot of the changes that are being made today, but they need to be real changes regarding the systemic racism, not just something that you smooth over.
Okay. Leon there in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Reminder to turn down your television, just listen and talk through your phone. Michael in Prattville, Alabama. Good morning to you. Go ahead.
Oh, good morning, brother. Nice to speak to you again. What Juneteenth means to me is we celebrate it, and it's an acknowledgement of, to me, it's the official end when slaves out east of the Mississippi, because I'm a retired military, and I didn't know much about Juneteenth, and I'm well educated until I was stationed out in New Mexico, and this is in 1991. And when someone came up to me and talked about Juneteenth, I didn't have a clue. So if you were east of the Mississippi, you knew the Civil War was over with. You knew that the proclamation was out there. If you were west of the Mississippi, you didn't know. It was 2.5 years when slaves were, people were still in bondage. And that's what this is about, the official recognition of the end of that war. And it needs to be recognized and celebrated. National holiday, no national holiday, but it needs to be in the history books. It needs to be an acknowledgement. And that's all, what we're asking about, what I'm asking, saying. Because when I got out there and it was explained to me about Juneteenth and actually a lot more history of the Black cavalry after the Civil War that was moved out west to help tame the West. That's part of our education and history, and no one knows about that, or very little known about it on the east side of the Mississippi. It's a blurb in history books compared to living out west in the Colorado, Texas, New Mexico area. So that's, yes, let's recognize that. Let's make sure it's there. Let's make sure it's in the history. And it's great hearing from you again. You have an excellent show. I enjoyed it. I've been a C-SPAN watcher probably since the early 90s when you guys started off in the Washington Journal. And I just have one more thing to say, and this is a little earlier. When we go from law and order, when we talk about that, let's get back to protect and serve. They shouldn't be two different things, because I grew up in two different communities, a poor community and half my life in a middle class upper community. One side was law and order, I can tell you. You got stopped and whatever. The other side, I can be out hanging with friends at 2 o'clock in the morning. Cops wouldn't even bother you because they weren't looking for crime. So you have a great day, and all the C-SPAN watchers, happy Juneteenth. Thank you.
All right, Michael. Brianna Holt, who's an African-American, writes in today's New York Times piece, and she writes this: on June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, Union soldiers arrived in Texas to report that the Confederacy had surrendered 2 months earlier, and that enslaved people were now free. Texas was the last state to receive the news. In celebration of the long overdue ending of slavery, Black Texans come together every year to remember our ancestors and the harsh treatment they endured for centuries. In a red state where white supremacy groups still congregate and Confederate flags fly from the back of trucks, it's an indication that we are just as Texan as anyone else, and our culture has influence in a place that once delayed our emancipation. African Americans only this morning. Bill, in New York, we'll go to you next. Bill, do you celebrate this day?
Good morning, Greta.
Morning.
Thank you for taking my call. Yes, and I would think, love the show, always watch it. Juneteenth means that it is just really, to me, another hidden American story that needs to be told. There's so much history for the American descendants of slaves that are not being told and have been hidden for so many years. And what I would say on my last note, it is another reason why there should be monetary, as far as programs and everything else for American descendants of slaves today, which would repair this hurt. And another look at it, 2 years they found out, worked for another 2 years for free to help build this country of what it is today. Thank you, and have a great day.
All right, Bill, Maya Phillips writes in today's New York Times a piece as well. She writes that even if amid upheaval, Juneteenth takes, there was a headline right there, even if Juneteenth were recognized as a national holiday, no one with any hint of familiarity with the state of Black people in America would confuse it with reparations or any palpable substantive change. But its growing recognition by states and companies and pulp culture, she writes, seems to reflect some level of accountability. She also writes, last week, Twitter and Square announced that Juneteenth would be a company holiday. The New York Times also decided to do the same. Almost all 50 states now recognize Juneteenth, and in 2018 resolution to make Juneteenth a national holiday passed in the Senate but never made it to the House for a vote. This Friday also brings the release of the film Miss Juneteenth, about a former pageant queen who pushes her daughter to compete for the crown in hopes that it will reveal a path to a better life. Carolyn in Baltimore, good morning to you. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for C-SPAN. I love C-SPAN. I knew Juneteenth, but I didn't formally celebrate it in the past. I think it does need to be a holiday. I think we need to, sadly, be forced to recognize the struggles that African Americans have faced and continue to face. And I only wish Juneteenth was when schools were in session so that we could teach the kids about Juneteenth also. But I do think that we do need to recognize that, you know, African Americans are part of history. We have made history, and the things that have been done to us and still continue to be done with us. So I definitely stand behind it being a holiday.
Okay, Carolyn. Mike in Stockton, California.
Yes, good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
Okay, it was told Moses, I'm going to get to the Juneteenth, but it was told Moses by God, the first day of the new year, I would like you to take my people from captivity. So Abraham Lincoln, he just showed emancipation 100 days from that day in 1862. He ordered the slaves to be freed in those states, and that was January 1st. And I just think it's quite a coincidence a man with a biblical name, Abraham, did that. So I think January 1st was the day that I believe we should have. Stockton had
parade way back then, as soon as we had the free, January 1st. And Stockton, California has that parade right now. Ralph White brought it back right here in Stockton on January 1st. We need to respect Juneteenth, but January 1st is the day that it happened. Thank you, Greta.
Okay, Mike. The president has sent out a presidential message on this day, writing, "The First Lady and I send our warmest greetings to those celebrating Juneteenth this year." And he writes, "Juneteenth reminds us both of the unimaginable injustice of slavery and the incomparable joy that must have attended emancipation. It is both a remembrance of a blight on our history and a celebration of our nation's unsurpassed ability to triumph over darkness. That ability is rooted in the fundamental goodness of America, in the truths upon which we as a nation declared an end to our status as the subjects of a monarch and emerged as a free and independent people, that all men are created equal by the hand of God, endowed by our Creator with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." These words form the heart of what Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. The celebration of Juneteenth marks an important milestone in the hard-fought journey to make good on that promise for all Americans. And he writes, "This Juneteenth, we commit as one nation to live true to our highest ideals and to build always toward a freer, stronger country that values the dignity and the boundless potential of all Americans." The president will be in Tulsa, Oklahoma tomorrow for a campaign rally. We'll have coverage of that Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern time, right here on C-SPAN, cspan.org, and also you can listen with the free C-SPAN radio app. Ruby, Richmond, Virginia. Hi, Ruby.
Hi. Look, I'm in favor of still national holiday, but I suggest that people go to the library or the bookstore and start reading up on the history of all aspects of African American history, because we're part of America too.
Hi, Fidel. In Columbus, Georgia, we're talking with African Americans only this morning. What does Juneteenth mean to you?
Juneteenth means to me, it should be a national holiday. It means the independence for blacks, but also when we think about Juneteenth, the difference is, I always have recommended that Columbus Day be done away with. Juneteenth be honoring towards the blacks who paid away for everything in America, because the contribution in America, blacks have done a lot in this country. So Juneteenth is, I didn't understand it until I got about 20 years old. There was a little town called Roberta, Georgia. They used to celebrate picnics and parade on Juneteenth. That's how I understand it and came to know about Juneteenth.
Okay. Steve in Illinois texts us to say, Juneteenth is not a celebration. It's a remembrance, an observance, and a reminder to white Americans the debt they still owe descendants of Africans who were enslaved. And then Vincent from Brooklyn, Juneteenth is a reminder that Black people must never allow our history to be erased. We must demonstrate and legislate. Hazel in Dearborn, Michigan. Hazel, good morning to you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for taking my call. I would like to share a historical background of that Juneteenth. I'm now 89 years old, and I'm from the Sancton Parish in Louisiana, ex-slaves. Every New Year's Eve night, we all went to church. And the reasoning for going to church was that at midnight we were praying because the ex-slaves who were freed, and when Texas refused to release those people, the ex-slaves prayed at that night that God would free those people who were still enslaved. And all of my life at midnight, I have been in a church and we were remembering it, but we didn't call it Juneteenth. We were also informed that whoever was supposed to tell those Texans that we were free, one of the persons was murdered. And so I was celebrating it without a name being given. And for the first time in my life, I'm now at a senior citizen place. I went to what they call these at midnight things, because in Detroit, we have it at midnight because people do a lot of shooting at night. So now that they're free. But before then, we were praying to God that those people who were still enslaved would be freed. So in Black, we got a religious background in that, as well as the freedom through the laws of this country.
Hazel in Dearborn, Michigan. As we told you, President Trump has his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma tomorrow night. You'll remember he changed the date. He was going to do it this evening, but he says because of Juneteenth, he moved it to tomorrow. Here on the Journal tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to talk about the history and significance of the Tulsa race riots during that hour. Our guest is University of Oklahoma African American Studies Professor Kalinda Eaton, right here on the Washington Journal tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. James in Cedar Hill, Texas. Hi, James. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Yes, I remember Juneteenth, I'm sorry. I grew up in the neighborhood right out of Galveston, Texas, and we celebrated it every June 19th. We had barbecue. We used to get kidded by people moving from another state. They call it watermelon and red soda water and barbecue. But this was the only day we were able, the segregated state, and this is the only day we were able to go to celebrate in the amusement park. They had a big amusement park in Houston. And every June 19th, this was the only day that they would let us in. Gave us the whole day. But we used to have family around on Juneteenth, and
James.
people coming from other states. They didn't know what Juneteenth was, and they used to kid us about it.
James, would you remember, I mean, what years are you talking about? This is when you were a child. So what years was that?
I'm 78 years old now, and that was 1946, 47.
Okay, thanks for the call, James. James in Cedar Hill, Texas. Pedro in Woodford, Virginia. Pedro, good morning.
Good morning, Greta. It's so good to see you.
Good to talk to
You're
you.
my favorite.
Oh, thank you. Good to talk to you, Pedro. So what does this day mean to you?
I just want to say I'm glad you guys are putting it up and letting people know about it, because some people don't know about it. And you're beautiful, Greta, and you have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Okay. All right, Pedro. Sammy in Birmingham, Alabama. Sammy, good morning.
Yes, good morning to you also. I want to say that, first of all, God made all of us already free. We were free when God blew his breath into us. But some people wanted to enslave African Americans. But Juneteenth, what it means to me is emancipation. And it's nothing new to me. I don't know what President Trump come up with the idea that he created Juneteenth, because we were celebrating in Alabama Juneteenth for millions, not millions, you understand what I'm saying, but for years. We always get together at the park and we celebrate in our homes also. So, it's official that he would even have this rally. And the people out there, they don't even understand what Juneteenth means to African Americans, because I feel that they're taking it lightly also. So Juneteenth means a lot to Black people. So we need white people to really find out about Juneteenth, because Black people, we already know what Juneteenth means.
So I want to just read this piece for you, and this is written in today's New York Times by Brianna Holt, and she's a cultural writer for the paper. She's from Texas, and she writes about what it was like to celebrate this when she was growing up in Texas. And she writes, if I wasn't marching along with friends, I'd catch a ride on the back of my grandfather's pickup truck and sit next to my dad. Prince would blast from the speakers while dancing pedestrians followed behind the car. Several people would yell thank you to my father, and I could see that he was proud of his work and even more proud of the kinship present in his own neighborhood. The 30-minute route would lead us to the park, where bounce houses, horseback riding, basketball courts, and a swimming pool awaited for the children. The adults and elders would congregate around the stage or browse through the vendors, debating what makes someone a true Christian and spreading neighborhood gossip. And then she goes on to write, this entire celebration lasted only 6 hours, but had the vitality to keep you feeling warm and loved throughout the summer. It acted as a reminder that there was a community of people who were rooting for you, supported you, and wanted to see you succeed. Every time you left a Juneteenth celebration, you took with you new stories, new connections, and a new sense of what it meant to be Black, but specifically what it meant to be Black in Texas. Patricia, in Dallas, Texas. Good morning to you, Patricia.
Good morning to you and happy Juneteenth, America. I remember seeing old pictures from the 1940s, and I asked my mom, I said, what's going on? And she said that was the Juneteenth celebration in Dallas, Texas from the 40s. Wonderful.
Did people stop celebrating it then, Patricia, or did it continue throughout your life?
They still continue. They do. And I'm so proud that we're finally going to recognize it because it's very important. The last state, to get rid of slavery. Very interesting.
Okay. Nokomis in Washington, D.C. You are next. What does this day mean to you?
Good morning. How are you doing?
Morning.
Happy Juneteenth. Juneteenth to me means freedom for Black people, but also unity with Black people and white people that are good people. I want to really thank God for all the white people that came out for Black Lives Matter here in D.C. It was really great to see. This country is founded on the Constitution, and we all die and fight for this Constitution. So I'm just hoping that Juneteenth becomes a holiday that we all can get together and celebrate, Black and white, and celebrate our country.
Okay, a few minutes left here. African Americans only this morning. What does this date mean to you? As we told you, Usher writing in the Washington Post today, recognizing Juneteenth as a national holiday would be a small gesture compared with the greater social needs of Black people in America. But it can remind us of our journey toward freedom and the work America still has to do. We could observe it, as many Black Americans already do, by celebrating both our first step toward freedom as Black people in America and also the many contributions to this land. The construction of Black Wall Street, the invention of jazz, rock and roll, hip hop, and R&B, and all the entrepreneurship and business brilliance, extraordinary cuisine, sports excellence, political power, and global cultural influence Black Americans have given the world. Usher writing in today's Washington Post. Michael in Hawaii. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Michael, what does this day mean to you?
I'm having a hard time hearing you, but I just called because when I was a kid, I used to go to Nicodemus, Kansas, and so we celebrated on the 1st of August. On the 1st of, I'm getting confused now, rather than 10th, it was the 1st.
And why?
Well, Nicodemus, Kansas, I think the people who moved there in about 1874 or so. That's when they celebrated that day rather than Juneteenth.
Got it.
It's not very well known. But there was a difference.
And what does this day mean, Michael, to you?
It doesn't mean much to me now. I mean, I'm a historian, PhD. It doesn't mean much to me now, but I just happened to notice that the celebration was on the 1st of August rather than Juneteenth. So I just thought that was just kind of a curious historical thing.
Okay. Jim, Grand Prairie, Texas. Good morning to you, Jim.
Good morning, Greta. I just want to state that I'm a big fan of reparations for slavery. I'm not sure if Juneteenth is ready for its to be a national holiday, but I am in favor of it. But I'm more in favor of reparations.
Okay.
And I'm from Oklahoma, and I moved here, and I hadn't heard of Juneteenth until I moved to Texas. I live in Texas now. But I am in favor of reparations as opposed to Juneteenth being a national holiday.
How do you plan to mark? How do you plan to mark the day, Jim? Do you have anything special in mind?
No, I don't. I don't have anything special in mind today.
Okay. Al, Temple Hills, Maryland. Hi, Al.
Yes, I'm just calling because I want to clarify something. We keep missing one point about Juneteenth. And by the way, it means a lot to me because I wasn't taught about it in school here in Washington, D.C. But it was because in 1865, the Texans were forced to give up their slaves. They knew about it in 1863. It wasn't something that they did nicely. Thank you.
Okay, Al in Temple Hills, Maryland. We'll leave it there for the day. We'll be back here tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Eastern time. We hope you join us then. Have a great weekend.
Live this Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern, the Poor People's Campaign Rally, an online gathering of people from across the country speaking out against social injustice. Speakers include activist Cornel West, actor Danny Glover, comedian Wanda Sykes, actress Deborah Messing, former Vice President Al Gore and his daughter Corinna, and actress and activist Jane Fonda. Live Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern, the Poor People's Campaign Rally Against Social Injustice on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or listen live on the free C-SPAN radio app.
This November, we are going to take back the House, we are going to hold the Senate, and we are going to keep the White House.
President Trump returns to the campaign trail Saturday for a rally in Tulsa. Watch our live coverage starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, on demand at cspan.org, or listen on the go with the free C-SPAN radio app.
How safe is air travel now? The House Homeland Security Subcommittee on Aviation and Maritime Security is looking into that. Members talked with representatives from the U.S. Travel Association, ACLU, Association of Flight Attendants, and Airports Council International North America about efforts to improve the safety of airports and planes and what the federal government can do.
Transportation and Maritime Security will now come to order. And thank you, Ranking Member Lesko and our panel of witnesses for joining us today. And we're here to discuss proposals for how to restore our nation's aviation system that's been so devastated by COVID-19. We've seen passenger volume in the last few months go as low as 5% of normal. Today, it is close to 15 to 20% of normal, but that's just not good enough to keep the aviation industry in business. It's not good enough to the health of this nation. And as all of us know, this pandemic is unprecedented. The lack of federal leadership and interagency coordination is very concerning to all of us. Of course, we ask the question, how can we protect our frontline aviation workers and our passengers if our consultation coordination is not there? And that's why Chairman Thompson and I recently sent a letter with the leadership of the Transportation Committee to the heads of DHS and DOT, calling for an interagency task force to take a holistic approach to supporting our nation's aviation industry. And I'm very concerned about the different requirements for mass temperature checks, health assessments across the aviation industry. A lot of different requirements, a lot of confusion. This is not good for the traveling public. It creates risk for both passengers and aviation workers. We have to follow and trust the expertise and recommendation of our public health officials. They have to be the ones front and center when it comes to public policy. Science and facts must inform future government and industry actions. And our decisions ultimately will affect millions of travelers and nearly 11 million people whose jobs depend on a healthy aviation sector. Now repeat, 11 million workers who depend on the aviation industry. Among the most publicized CDC guidelines are social distancing measures. They were most visible when stay-at-home orders were issued across the country and have been credited for helping to slow the spread of this deadly virus. Today, social distancing measures are visible at security checkpoints and at boarding gates. However, on board many aircraft, different images have emerged. We've seen social media posts of crowded aircraft full of unmasked passengers. And Americans are rightfully surprised and troubled to see passengers forced to travel in those conditions when, by all accounts, the demand for travel is still very low. And even now, we hear from airlines that limiting passenger load factors or limiting middle seats is not necessary. An unfortunate reality to this moment is that we are forced to address this crisis during a perilous economic environment with very limited resources. That's why we must make sure that the measures we put into place are effective and innovative. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today who represent different parts of the industry and have different perspectives on temperature checks, health assessments, health questionnaires, and contact tracing. The complexities of air travel under COVID-19 have also sparked an interest in technological solutions. Reducing contact between frontline employees and passengers is critical to limit the transmission of the virus. Of equal importance is to make sure that the medicine is not worse than the disease. The impact of these technologies and procedures on the privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties of the flying public must be communicated clearly as well. Further, any such invasive protocols like temperature checks should be subject to notice and comment by the public before they are widespread deployed. For example, I understand that TSA is considering installing cameras with facial recognition software on TSA's credential authentication technology or CAT machines that are in use in some TSA security checkpoints. Before we roll out such facial recognition biometric technology in airports, TSA and DHFs have a lot of work to do. This committee has already done a great deal of oversight on this issue, but there are still many concerns over data collection, data protection, and use of public's identity data. Can somebody mute themselves out there? It is not in anyone's interest to see the department push out new facial recognition technology without having the necessary protection in place. Another technology under consideration is detection at range. These machines use thermal imaging technology to detect metal and non-metallic threats and can reduce the need for pat-downs at security points. However, history reminds us that the last time TSA deployed image technology, specifically the advanced image technology at checkpoints today, Congress had to step in. Congress issued a deadline to stop the use of scanners that did not protect the passenger's privacy, which resulted in avatar use today. Ultimately, I'm looking for solutions, and I want to hear from our aviation partners, and the public has the right to an informed debate that highlights the issue that must be identified and considered before these decisions are made. Last but not least, I want to hear from our stakeholders how they are protecting their frontline workers. There's no aviation industry without the workers. Keeping workers healthy and safe and supporting them during this pandemic will ensure that this industry and its employees make it through. Our aviation industry is resilient, but needs all of us to work together to ensure the safety, security, and health of the public. And I look forward to a discussion today. And now I would like to recognize the ranking member for an opening statement. The chair now recognizes ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, for an opening statement. Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to see all of you, and hello to Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Rogers. Good to see both of you as well. I am pleased that the subcommittee is meeting today to perform oversight that is critical to both the health of our nation and our nation's economy. I am disappointed, however, that members are not allowed to meet in person. I, for one, am here in Washington, D.C., and I'm in 2 other committees where we are allowed to go in person, even if other members choose to go remotely. My understanding, this committee does not allow that. While other committees have developed protocols to allow members to safely meet in committee spaces, This committee has not. This is not in keeping with the guidance of the House Rules Committee. I hope that soon we can move forward in a manner that allows members to be physically present for the work our constituents sent us here to do. Turning to the topic of today's hearing, I want to commend the men and women of the TSA for continuing to do their jobs faithfully throughout the pandemic, even as their agency became the hardest hit in Department of Homeland Security. More than 650 TSA personnel have tested positive for the virus, and tragically 5 TSA personnel have lost their lives. And I sincerely want to say that I pray for the families, for their comfort from their loss. The aviation industry is one of many sectors of the economy that have been devastated by the impacts of COVID-19. At the pandemic's peak, air travel dropped below 100,000 passengers per day, a level not seen in the history of TSA, and far below the average 2.5 million travelers per day that TSA was screening prior to the virus's outbreak. And I can tell you from personal experience, I assume you have seen the same, is when this whole thing kind of started and I started traveling back to Washington, D.C., there was maybe 12 people on the plane. It has since grown. When I came last, the plane was pretty full. Not totally full, but it was getting better. Now that's also due to the fact that my airline I travel on cut down to 1 nonstop flight per day. As our nation slowly reemerges from the worst of the pandemic, we are beginning to see slivers of hope that air travel is starting to increase. With this recovery, TSA and transportation stakeholders are responding to new challenges in order to keep travelers safe and get America flying again. This process presents stakeholders in this subcommittee with important questions, including, what will the TSA screening process look like? What changes need to occur for passengers to be and feel safe? And what more can be done to protect passengers from a potential second wave of coronavirus or a future pandemic? These questions and more continue to circulate within the aviation community, and it is my hope to hear feedback from our stakeholder panel today. Having recently received a briefing from TSA's administrator, Mr. Pekoski, I am eager to hear the stakeholders' perspective on what partnering with TSA looks like in response to the pandemic and how best to implement new solutions to passenger screening and safety. The aviation sector is truly on the front lines in the fight to protect public health and ensure the free movement of people and goods, and that fuel America's economy. I really do want to thank each one of the witnesses today. We are in unprecedented times. When I first started traveling, it looked like a ghost town, like we were on some kind of movie where, people didn't exist anymore. And, I was often the only car, pulling up to be dropped off at the airport. And so I'm glad to see that it's picking up somewhat, but I do want to hear from our witnesses on what their recommendations are, because we honestly need to get our economy back working again. And so thank you again. And I yield back.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I want to thank the ranking member, and with that, I'd like to yield to the ranking member for the purposes of a colloquy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, could you please, Mr. Chairman, explain our agreement on committee procedures during these remote proceedings?
Thank you, ranking member. Let me begin by saying that the Standing House Committee Rules and Practices will continue to apply during remote proceedings. Members may be expected to continue to adhere to those rules of the committee and the House. During the covered period that is designated by our speaker, the committee will operate in accordance with House Resolution 965 and the subsequent guidance from Rules Committee in a manner that respects the rights of all members to participate. The technology that we're using today requires us to make some small modifications to assure that the members can fully participate in these proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you also elaborate on how members may expect to be recognized during the proceedings?
Thank you very much. First, to simplify the order of questioning, I'll establishing a quorum or for voting. And members should make every effort to remain visible on the screen throughout the proceedings. If a member experiences issues with their video stream, they may proceed with solely audio to ensure connection, provided they have been identified previously. At the beginning of this hearing, members are on mute. Members may unmute themselves in order to be recognized for the purposes of their 5-minute questioning of the witnesses. At the conclusion of speaking, members will be expected to then mute themselves again to prevent excess background noise. In the event that a member does not mute themselves after speaking, the clerk has been directed to mute the members to avoid background noise. Should a member wish to be recognized to make a motion, they must unmute themselves and seek recognition at the right time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have, before we proceed, I have a question for the staff. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you knew it, but your video went away and your speaking went away for a while, at least on my side. And so to the staff, do we need to repeat all this stuff for the record that he said when he lost connection with him? Is there any staff members, parliamentarians, anybody on this call?
Mr. Chairman, if you can just read the last paragraph one more time.
In the event that a member does not mute themselves after speaking, the clerk has been directed to mute members to avoid background noise. Should a member wish to be recognized to make a motion, they must unmute themselves and seek recognition at the right time.
Okay, well, you to the staff, you might want to email all of these rules out if you haven't already, because it wasn't the last paragraph that went out.
I can go back and read the whole.
I don't need it for me. I just don't know if it needs to be done officially or not.
Got it.
I can move on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What could a member expect should they encounter technical issues during a remote event? Which is kind of funny because that just happened.
Ms. Lesko, you're prophetic. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party and will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceeding. Should a member's time be interrupted by technical issues, I'll recognize that member at the next appropriate spot for the remainder of their time once their issues have been resolved. In the event that I should encounter technical issues, the vice chair of the committee, if available, or the next senior member of the majority shall assume the duties of the chair until I'm able to return to the proceedings. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, what should members expect regarding decorum during a remote event?
Thank you. Members are reminded that they are only allowed to attend one virtual event at a time. Should they need to attend another committee's proceedings, Please fully exit the hearing before entering another proceeding. And finally, all members are reminded that they are expected to observe standing rules of the committee decorum for appropriate attire and should have a professional and apolitical background when they're participating in any remote event.
Thank you. And what should members expect if a witness loses connectivity?
In the event a witness loses connectivity during testimony and questioning, I will preserve their time as staff addresses the technical issue. I may need to recess the proceedings to provide time for the witness to reconnect. Debbie, you're muted.
Oh.
Go ahead. Can't hear you.
I think what's happening is I'm doing it and the staff is doing it, or something's going on. Hopefully you can hear me now. Mr. Chairman, finally, what should members expect if a vote is called during a remote event?
Thank you. House Resolution 965 requires members to be visibly present to have their vote recorded during a remote event. Members who join the proceedings after a vote is called and who are not called upon for their vote should seek recognition from the chair to ensure that their vote is recorded. And should a member lose connectivity during a roll call vote, I will hold the vote open for a period of time to address the technical issue and provide members with the opportunity to have their vote recorded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, and with that, I ask unanimous consent to waive Committee Rule 8, Sub A, Sub 2 for the subcommittee during remote proceedings under the covered period designated by the Speaker under House Resolution 965. And without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes the chairperson of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for an opening statement. Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, can't hear you, sir.
Okay, I think we got it this time. Thank you, Chairman Correa and Ranking Member Lesko for holding today's hearing. I welcome stakeholder perspectives on safety resuming air travel in the era of COVID-19. The aviator sector consists of so much more than TSA and FAA. It includes airports, municipal authorities, airlines, and importantly, all their dedicated employees. Additionally, it includes civil rights and civil liberties organizations who focus on protecting travelers' privacy and civil rights, a heightened concern in the wake of coronavirus. COVID-19 has not only inflicted unprecedented loss of life on our country, but it has devastated industries, including the aviation sector. Our nation's aviation system has been the front line of efforts to stop the spread of this pandemic from the beginning. TSA's transportation security officers constantly interact with passengers, flight crew members, and other airport workers, putting themselves at risk each and every day. According to TSA, to date, 651 TSA employees have tested positive for the virus, of which 468 employees have recovered, and sadly, 5 have died. And as chairman of this committee, I've advocated tirelessly on behalf of TSA's frontline workforce and demanded that they be issued appropriate protective equipment like gloves and masks to do their important work. They, after all, are on the front lines of aviation security, keeping the traveling public secure from threats to transportation during a global pandemic. We must continue to make every effort to ensure that all aviation workers are kept safe from this virus. This includes airport workers, flight crew members, and mechanics. Failures to keep these employees safe has severe negative implications, not only the workers in the aviation sector, but also risk further spread of the virus. Like I mentioned earlier, the impact of COVID-19, according to TSA, air travel is down 84% from this exact moment last year. Given this reality, the federal government must establish the right health, safety, and security standards to protect airport workers and restore public confidence in travel. This will require significant coordination and collaboration on the part of agencies like TSA, FAA, and the White House. Coordination and collaboration that currently does not exist. Instead, we see a patchwork of standards and requirements throughout the aviation sector. The American people and the traveling public deserve better. That is why I call for DHS and DOT to establish an interagency task force to ensure that all efforts and policies are coordinated at the highest levels in a holistic manner to support the successful recovery of the aviation industry. Recent news reports have suggested that DHS may be preparing to commence a temperature check program where TSA would be tasked with checking the temperatures of departing passengers to identify individuals who may be COVID-19, may have COVID-19. I find this news alarming, given that there's an absence of evidence that such health screenings are effective, especially since people can spread COVID-19 asymptomatically. Not to mention, there are civil rights and civil liberties concerns around TSA conducting temperature checks. I'm particularly concerned about DHS collecting, using, and safeguarding the sensitive health information of the traveling public, airport workers, and airline crew members. Additionally, given that COVID-19 disproportionately impacts certain communities, including African Americans and the elderly, any proposed temperature check protocols must be designed to guard against the potential discrimination of travelers. All the issues I just raised highlight that any temperature check program must undergo the notice and comment regulatory process to ensure the proper rollout of temperature checks in our nation's airports. The future of the aviation industry in the COVID-19 era will include a number of challenges, as I have just outlined. As the chairman of this committee, I'm committed to working with TSA and aviation stakeholders to ensure that the sector ultimately succeeds despite these challenges. I'm interested in hearing from today's witnesses on how we collectively can do so. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the general member from the state of Alabama, Mr. Rogers, for an opening statement. Welcome, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I'm pleased the subcommittee is meeting to hear stakeholder perspectives on safely resuming air travel, though I am perplexed as to why the ACLU is here and not the airports. Mr. Chairman, I'm also disappointed that members are unable to meet physically for this important hearing. Yesterday and today, two large committees met for markups. Members were physically present and adhered to social distancing guidelines during debate. Minority members also were allowed to use the committee rooms for these hearings. The House will be back next week voting in person, yet this committee chooses not to vote in person or to meet in person. The minority looks forward to working with the majority in a bipartisan manner to allow members to be physically present for committee activities in the future. Today's hearing comes at a time when thousands of aircraft remain grounded across the United States. Passenger volume has dipped 85% below average. Ensuring that travelers have confidence in the ability to fly safely is vital to the industry. Aviation stakeholders must work collaboratively with relevant government entities, including TSA, to restore trust in air travel. As an agency, TSA has been on the front lines throughout this pandemic. We're grateful to the thousands of TSA officers who have continued to protect the traveling public. More than 650 of these line officers have contracted the virus, and each member of this committee is saddened by the tragic loss of 5 TSA personnel to COVID-19. In addition, air transportation stakeholders have also seen their personnel hit hard by COVID-19. As we seek to ensure the health and safety of aviation personnel and travelers, I hope to hear more about what policies and procedures have been implemented in recent months. I also hope to hear from the witnesses what additional actions to be taken to protect the flying public. I thank the witnesses for appearing before the committee, and I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
This is why I didn't say anything. Women speaking. You can't hear you either.
I don't think we can hear you, Lou.
I couldn't hear all of you either. You dropped out. Mr. Rogers, did you finish your statement?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I yield it back.
Thank you very much. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. And now I'd like to welcome our panel of witnesses and thank them for joining us today. Our first witness is Mr. Kevin Burke, President and CEO of the Airports Council International North America, where he's been since 2014. ACA is a trade association representing the governing bodies that operate over 300 commercial airports in the U.S. and Canada. Our second witness will be Ms. Sarah Nelson, who serves as the International President of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, representing 50,000 flight attendants at 20 airlines. And she has served in this capacity since 2014 and has been a union member since becoming a flight attendant in 1996. Our third witness, Ms. Nima Singh Giuliani, serves as Senior Legislative Counsel with the American Civil Liberties Union. Ms. Giuliani is part of the National Political Advocacy Department that is focused on surveillance, privacy, and national security issues. And before joining the ACLU, she worked in the Department of Homeland Security, concentrating on national security and civil rights issues. And our fourth and final witness is Ms. Victoria Emerson Barnes, the Executive Vice President for Public Affairs and Policy at the U.S. Travel Association. The association represents over 1,100 members, organizations in the U.S. travel industry, and supports almost 16 million jobs. Without objection, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. And now I'm going to ask each witness to summarize their statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Burke. Welcome, Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Cisco for inviting me today. Please excuse my voice. It's allergy time, and I'm doing my best to get through a 5-minute statement and ask questions later. Again, I'm Kevin Burke, President and CEO of Airports Council International North America, trade association representing airports in the United States and Canada. I welcome this opportunity to discuss with you today the current state of America's airports and new policy recommendations ACINA has developed to provide for the health of travelers, to instill public confidence in air travel, and set a solid foundation for the future of aviation. But since the outbreak of COVID-19, airports have been intensely focused on providing for the health and safety of passengers, employees, and their tenants. To raise public awareness about reducing the spread of COVID-19, airports were updating their public websites, installing signage, and making routine public announcements about safety in the airports. Airports have also implemented numerous mitigation measures at their facilities. That includes deploying additional hand sanitizer stations, and plexiglass barriers and ticket counters, checkpoints, gates, and in restrooms. Airports are also working to ensure physical distancing space for the facilities, which, as we'll discuss later, is a very large challenge. And airports have increased the frequency of cleaning with an intense focus on, quote, touch points. As we continue to navigate these unprecedented times, U.S. airports are very grateful for the $10 billion in emergency support Congress provided with the CARES Act. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it was a lifeline for every commercial airport in this country. The CARES Act grants are helping airports offset some of the financial damage from the abrupt drop in air travel. But airports nationwide still face major financial and operational hurdles. Now, as all of you who travel to and from your districts back to Washington, you all know that America's airports are indeed hurting. With passenger traffic down nearly 90% from this time last year, that's 90% from this time last year, ECINA estimates U.S. airports face at least $23 billion in operating losses as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, on top of that, these airports face significant new COVID-related operating expenses for cleaning, employing hand sanitizers, installing plexiglass barriers, supplying personal protective equipment, and encouraging physical distance in our airports. So airports are working hard to cut their budgets, defer many capital projects, and plan for the new airport experience once this COVID-19 pandemic gets out of the way for us. They're also helping employees in this time of extreme stress. We want to keep people working at our airports. We continue to coordinate closely, very closely, with FAA, the TSA, Customs and Border Protection, and others on recovery efforts, regulatory guidance, and regulatory flexibility to help airports remain open while ensuring the safety and security of the traveling public. I commend the agency leaders, as David Pekoski from TSA and Steve Dixon from FAA, for partnering with us and other airport members on these initiatives and for their extraordinary accessibility and assistance during this very challenging time. My written statement details federal policy solutions we and our members have developed to assist airports and aviation as we head towards recovery. I would like to highlight 3 key points this afternoon. First, with air traffic and airport revenues down significantly, U.S. airports need another infusion of federal funds to assist during this national emergency. $13 billion in additional emergency assistance is needed to help airports meet growing operating costs and their debt service obligations in the coming year. Second, U.S. airports are working with stakeholders to develop and implement new measures to protect public health. We need what I would call a touchless aviation security screening process to help provide adequate physical distancing for passengers and their baggage as they move through TSA checkpoints and Customs and Border Protection's ports of entry. Now, to achieve this, we recommend the following. New checkpoint technology that reduces touch points, maintains physical distancing, and increases security effectiveness. We also need a sufficient number of TSA officers so checkpoints remain operational, efficient, and safe by maintaining an efficient flow of passengers, and again, providing for that critical social distancing. More support for existing programs like janitorial reimbursement, law enforcement officer reimbursement, and explosive detection system. We also need a new airport security grant program at TSA to fund activities like perimeter security, checkpoint redesigns, pandemic planning, airport emergency operation centers, and enhanced closed circuit TV. And third, we recommend the establishment of a joint advisory panel involving DHS, DOT, HHS, the State Department, and industry stakeholders to develop recommendations for the operational, infrastructure, and technology issues related to pandemic planning. Now, ladies and gentlemen, airports are leading economic engines in your districts, in your communities, and investments in airports have multiplying impacts throughout the region. We look forward to working together to help airports weather this crisis so we can get Americans back to work and back traveling again in an aviation system that is safer, stronger, more secure, and more resilient than ever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burke, and I'll recognize Ms. Nelson to summarize her statement in 5 minutes. Ma'am?
Thank you, Chairman Correa, Ranking Member Lesko, and of course Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Rogers, for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Sarah Nelson. I'm a 24-year union flight attendant and president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, representing flight attendants across the industry. The coronavirus is by far the largest crisis ever experienced in aviation. We must make some substantial changes to air travel to meet this moment. Just as we did under the leadership of DOT Secretary Norm Mineta and President George W. Bush in the aftermath of 9/11, starting with new emergency procedures enacted as early as September 12, 2001. Throughout this crisis, airlines have been responsive to our concerns on certain safety policies. All major airlines now have put in place the requirement of masks in the airport and on the plane. But after nearly 120,000 Americans have died, no contact tracing or containment in place, we are just now on day 3 of this requirement by airlines. Without clear instruction from government and airlines to passengers and crew, proper training, or federal enforcement, flight attendants are left to manage a hodgepodge of airline policies on the front lines. Most travelers comply with the mask requirement, but conflict still flares up as some have been led to believe masks are a political statement rather than a public health necessity. Safety is built with a layered approach. This is exactly why we have a Department of Transportation to coordinate every aspect of travel, consider every touch point, and coordinate private, public, and federal sector workers and services to facilitate safe, efficient, accessible travel. Without a federal requirement, including procurement of proper PPE, we leave many vulnerabilities and opportunities for spread, creating unnecessary health risks for travelers and essential workers. Our union has written to DOT and HHS to urge the departments to issue emergency safety and health rules as detailed in our written testimony, and we would expect them to work with DHS as well. Statements by DOT indicate the department does not believe it has a role in public health regulations, but by contrast, the recent DOT ban on e-cigarette use aboard aircraft was to, quote, reduce the risk of adverse health effects on passengers and crew members, end quote. We strongly support daily health and wellness self-assessments for flight attendants and other aviation workers before we report for duty, and for passengers before they fly. This can and should be done without requiring aviation workers or passengers to reveal private health information. Creating a community health corps deployed at our airports can also create good jobs that help to reverse sky-high unemployment. Staying off a flight or duty at the airport to protect health and safety should never result in discipline for workers. But many carriers have long-standing punitive policies that can lead to discipline or even termination for use of legitimate sick leave. Without federal guidelines that prohibit discipline, airlines will choose to do for themselves what policies they will put in place. Already, Delta Airlines subsidiary Endeavor Air has announced that it will apply disciplinary points for any callouts based on new COVID-19 symptom checks. Many other carriers have instituted symptom checks and instructed flight crews to follow federal guidelines to stay home if ill, but have not committed to protect workers who follow the rules. Congress can help the entire industry stay safe by working with federal regulators to pass emergency rules that protect jobs, pay, and benefits of any aviation worker who is unable to fly because of COVID-19 symptoms. Standards for health and safety will be impossible to implement without the dedicated, highly trained, and credentialed workforce of the aviation industry. Flight attendants and aviation workers have been on the front lines of the virus since its earliest days, and we are essential to our nation's ability to function. That is why members of both parties joined together this past March to pass a historic Workers First relief package for aviation workers in the CARES Act. The payroll support program has kept close to 1 million workers in our jobs and connected to our health care and other benefits through September 30th. I urge the members of this committee to support a clean extension of the PSP through at least January 31st, 2021, without which we will see hundreds of thousands of furloughs and layoffs as of October 1st. Finally, I'd like to recognize the critical need to address the disproportionate impact of coronavirus on Black lives. We must do everything we can in every sector to ensure we implement anti-racist policies. Coronavirus lays bare that an injury to one is an injury to all. On this point, we also celebrate 2 major Supreme Court cases this week that are a step forward on anti-discrimination. The last thing we need in the middle of a pandemic is removing Dreamers or LGBTQ workers from their jobs and healthcare. These rulings acknowledge the dignity of American workers, and Congress has the opportunity to recognize the dignity of work during this pandemic by ensuring that workers on the front lines are protected. Thank you so much for your time, attention, and action. Flight attendants appreciate the work of this this community so much. We depend on you, and we look forward to it.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson, for your testimony. Now I'd like to recognize Ms. Giuliani to summarize her statement in 5 minutes. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the ACLU. COVID-19 and 9/11 are two very different crises, but they have some things in common. Both resulted in a tragic loss of life, both upended the aviation industry, and both triggered quick and massive investments. After 9/11, we wasted billions of dollars in many failed programs that did not make us safer and violated basic liberties. As we grapple with COVID-19 and how to make air travel safe again, we must be vigilant to not repeat the mistakes of the past. We rushed to implement many measures that were ineffective and inconsistent with our values. The stakes for getting it right are high. If our aviation response to COVID-19 is ineffective or privacy invasive, it will not only hurt air travel, it will also undermine our overall public health efforts by decreasing trust and contributing to community transmission. Fortunately, public health professionals have provided us guidance on how we can avoid the mistakes of the past. These experts have emphasized that the most effective measures are rooted in public trust and voluntary compliance. They have cautioned against a law enforcement approach, which often sparks resistance and distrust. Some of the best ways to make air travel safer are low tech, and if implemented correctly, will likely have a minimal impact on individuals' rights. These include reducing how crowded airplanes are and facilitating basic health precautions like hand washing and wearing a mask. It also includes making it easy for individuals to change their travel plans without penalty if they're exhibiting COVID symptoms or may have been exposed to disease, and providing flexible and paid sick leave to all employees so that workers do not suffer financially when they take steps to protect us all. An approach rooted in compliance and trust is also consistent with our values. As we consider new measures in response to COVID-19, we must remember that the right to travel is not a luxury, it's a constitutional right. As former Supreme Court Justice William Douglas observed, freedom of movement is the very essence of free society. The Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized that the right to travel is protected under the Fifth Amendment as a liberty interest and cannot be denied without due process of law. It also implicates the First Amendment. Thus, it is unconstitutional to deny individuals the right to fly in ways that are unnecessary, arbitrary, or discriminatory. Given this, any new measure should reflect the following 5 principles. 1, it must be recommended by public health agencies and developed in concert with public health professionals. For example, if reports are accurate and the CDC recommended against temperature checks in airports as a poorly designed control and detection strategy, they should not be deployed. If they are, they must meet clearly established public benchmarks for effectiveness. 2, any measure must not improperly restrict individuals' right to travel. For example, using temperature checks as the sole basis for barring people from traveling would be inherently overbroad. It would sweep in individuals who might have fevers for reasons unrelated to COVID-19, likely disproportionately affecting people with chronic illnesses. Thus, at most, an elevated temperature should merely trigger further examination with avenues for redress. 3, any measure deployed should not collect additional personal data unless it is fully transparent and strictly necessary from a public health standpoint. This information should only be stored and used by public health agencies for public health purposes, and not maintained on DHS databases, shared with law enforcement or immigration agencies, or used for any other purpose. The last thing we want is people being fearful of disclosing medical or other critical facts out of fear about how such information can be used against them in other contexts. Proposals like the TSA's CAT-C expansion or other uses of face recognition technology, which do not adhere to this principle, should be rejected as a response to COVID. TSA's most recent privacy impact assessment goes beyond the one-to-one map system to permit networking with a secure flight system. There are countless other less costly and less invasive ways to reduce transmission of disease on travel documents, like asking someone to hold their document up for review instead of handing it to somebody. These options do not involve the multitude of privacy and civil liberties concerns of facial recognition. Suggesting such an expansion should move forward as a response to COVID will rightfully cause travelers to question the legitimacy of other TSA measures going forward. 4, there must be proactive transparency and accountability. This will require many things, but at a minimum should require that an independent oversight body assess any proposed measure for effectiveness.
Let's just see what's on her mind. She is talking. Wasn't sure. Not doing here. So let's talk. Yeah. Indeed.
Testified before a House Homeland Security Subcommittee about improving airline safety and how the federal government can help in the effort. This is just under 2 hours.
Transportation and Maritime Security will now come to order. Thank you, Ranking Member Lesko and her panel of witnesses for joining us today. And we're here to discuss proposals for how to restore this barge facility.
Washington Journal continues.
And we'll continue with talking about police reform in this country until the top of the hour. We want to figure your thoughts on what you would support. What changes do you want to see happen here in Washington? Eddie, in Baltimore, a Democratic caller. Eddie, what do you think? What should happen?
Well, first of all, I want to say good morning, C-SPAN, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would like to speak from a voice of reason right now because the problem of systemic racism involved in policing in this country, as all other things in wealth disparities and all things, comes down to finance. We want to talk about the black community. I just in the previous show listened to all kind of people condemn thugs and behaviors, but it all boils down to one thing: black behavior. If we go back to American history and what happened to the American Native Indians as we burned out their teepees and burnt down their civilization and ruled them and put what Trump called domination on them and got a country, it was first formed on a bad thing. But Karl Marx says that this problem of socialism in our society it stems from wealth. It's about those who have and those who have not. You're looking at oppressed people. I heard people speak about reform in policing. It starts with first hiring police who want to do the job of policing. We can't have a double standard of law. My people, I'm from Baltimore. I heard people talk all about Baltimore. But the problem here has been wealth disparity. I grew up in these communities. I'm 68 years old. The burning and looting is the cry of creed from the voice of the people who have been heavily oppressed. The treatment of people is on a humanitarian basis, that all people were created equal. I don't see that equal thing going on. Police reform starts with getting people who are judgmental, able to make healthy decisions, and know the power. Absolute power can corrupt. Absolutely, if you don't keep it maintained and have oversight on it. Police reform. I don't agree with dismantling no police. I don't believe in defunding no police because all these organizations need to be funded. I do find that the FOP FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, the protective sword, should only relate to their ability to do their job, not in their ability to break the law. When they break the law, they should have no voice in there. I want to keep it simple from that voice of reason. We're God's children. We should treat each other equally. Now, if you're going to find a lot of people going to jail, then all people should go to jail who break laws. I looked at a president who just took the order of what he says law and order and disturbed the whole order of the law. Then I'm just going to keep my comments simple. You want police reform, it starts with giving people some money. My people are suffering long from heavy oppression. There's many other races and other ethnic groups in this world. And until you stop giving us welfare and give us our fair share of wealth, this nation was built off the sweat of our backs, and old money still exists today. I listen to people like Mitch McConnell, whose people with slave owner, says that they have no voice in people today of what happened of old. But if you don't rectify what has already happened, you'll never be able to move to a point of what needs to happen. I rest my case.
All right, Eddie. David, Denison, Texas.
Amen. I'm going to pause right here and pause the recording. You know, it's so critical that we participate as American citizens, and that's just the bottom line. Every morning, I usually try to catch C-SPAN in the morning, listen to other people. Some people are really wild, and some people right on top. But until we all step up, nothing can change.